So the conceit on this video, called Imposter Syndrome, was that, I'd do my Schwarzenegger and, maybe even little King Charles. And each of them would be doing HR stuff. And of course, missing the mark most of the time. We had, Tommy Lee Jones doing the fugitive thing where we're going to do a hard target search of every outhouse, hen house, and doghouse. Your fugitive is any remote employee. So, it got a lot of views. People liked it. And, most importantly, I was trying to provide a little bit of solace that, these other stars, didn't have this hard thing called HR figured out easy either. So that was a lot of fun. And yeah, just adds another dimension to having a bit of fun with HR topics.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Peter Phelan. Peter's the founder and CEO at ValuesCulture. He's been a CPO at some global tech firms. He's been out there working with organizations to build high-performing cultures, working on executive search. And to round it all out, he does stand-up comedy. Some of you may have seen him. With an HR background, we know you have an endless supply of material. Welcome, Peter. Such a pleasure to have you.
Great to be here, Teri.
You've got quite a non-traditional resume. I was really hoping we could talk about your path, how you've helped organizations achieve high levels of trust, some of the challenges you've faced and overcome along the way, and how you've done that. Does that sound like a good plan to you?
Sure. I will give you the quick version. So I studied in Ireland. I guess the resume has some traditional qualities to it insofar as I studied management at University College Dublin in a commerce degree, and then went on to do a master's in HRM. We called it HRM, which I'll get back to later with a joke reference, but proceeded to, do the traditional thing in many ways. I got a lottery green card that same year as the master's, which was amazing. So I came to the States and forged a career across some multiple industries, kind of moving up through the ranks to the VP and then chief people officer job in the couple of tech companies that you were kind enough to mention. So, that was the standard. Oh yeah, I recognize this pattern. Then in parallel, there was a little bit of a fondness for humor throughout. And the HRM reference I made earlier was, and we're doing our first group presentation in that master's program, and it was pretty fundamental stuff. So I opened with a statement. What is HRM? Is it hairy Russian monkeys? And this was quite confusing to our professor, who was this awesome guy, but a very straight-laced board director. He was also a senator in the Irish government. But he got a chuckle out of the ridiculousness of this opening line in my presentation, which then became quite more serious and conventional. But yeah, the HR thing and the humor thing have coexisted in my life for decades, and I think that they go well together. And I look forward to talking about that marriage with you a bit more today.
Yeah, that was interesting. One of my questions is, where did that come from?
Goes
But
way back.
you're kind of my intro obviously didn't do you justice. I mean, you're kind of a superstar, maybe bordering on legend at this point. You do podcasts all the time. So I'm sincerely thankful that you joined my little podcast. You've done Unleashed and Disrupt HR, and I saw that you've had some awards in top innovator, a keynote speaker. I mean, is there anything you haven't done?
Well, I guess I'm a generalist or I was a generalist as I kind of rose up through the ranks. We know that HR jobs are very wide. They're like 30 different jobs. So in that sense, I guess there's a lot I did do. But one thing that I prefer about being a consultant now and just doing more specific things is that the playbooks that I was able to deploy in-house to win, lots of great places to work awards through forging really healthy internal communication feedback loops up, down across the organization, that there's a certain amount of deep expertise maybe in my consulting practice where I do those culture strategy projects and I do executive search for chief people officers. So, I guess these days I do less as opposed to what is there anything I don't do. I do less in a sense, but I like to think I do it better. And one of the ways that I can kind of accelerate trust with clients and prospects is to maybe because I go so deep in these couple of different things at this point in my career, I can convey mastery by joking about them and kind of going that kind of next level of depth. So that's been fun to kind of
Yeah.
accelerate trust through a little bit of humor in unexpectedly effective ways.
Yeah. Short of your college career, when you kind of came up with the hairy Russian monkeys, I'm never going to forget this. HR, they want to be, and they need to be, for all intents and purposes, taken pretty seriously. And people generally look to them for, the cultural approach, things like that. What, when was the first time you used it in an HR setting? Like, what did that look like? And what made you think that that would actually work?
Yeah. So most of my career has been in the States here. So I saw this idea of humor and mastery kind of being coexisting in maybe an unexpected place for the audience, but it was The Simpsons. So I was kind of relatively new to the States. Of course, I'd gotten some tutelage in the ways because we had a lot of American TV and stuff over in Ireland, but still there was lots of nuances I didn't have because I just didn't grow up here for two
Yeah.
decades like a lot of my peers. So I loved how the Simpson writers are so clever, where they can kind of convey the foibles of, some of aspects of American life and culture with some gentle ribbing of the country and the culture, but at the same time convey a tremendous amount of information about, the history, the politics, real info. So, and that kind of made me think, okay, maybe I should be doing a bit of edutainment myself. So the first manifestation, to answer your question, was probably like in new hire orientations when I was back in my 20s, early career, initial jobs. And so I was kind of committed to not having the glazed new hire orientation, PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint experience for the newbies. So I would add jokes to kind of keep them engaged. And it was pretty effective. At Bloomberg, which was a few years later into my career, I actually got to translate that humor from the internal education sessions to Bloomberg Radio. They took a chance on me, a very serious place. Now, you think HR is serious and we want to, be taken seriously. Well, Wall Street, even more serious. You don't tune into Bloomberg Radio for giggles. But when the markets are closed on the weekends, they said, yeah, we got time to fill. So, Peter, if you convey some kind of how to make the most of your benefit plans at your employer to the audience in a way that's accurate, they don't want to be misleading people on their airwaves, and engaging, go for it. So, I did this agony uncle type format where I would write a fake letter to, the financier was my persona. Dear financier, I'm just off the boat from Ireland and I'm very confused. There's a big sign in the bank window saying tax deductible contributions to the IRA. Like, what's going on? Then I proceed to explain, oh, different kind
Oh,
of IRA over here. And then I talk about the advantages and stuff. So it's like you get people's attention and then you educate them. And so that's been kind of that was the early formula and one I still use.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, in today's environment, we're seeing so many challenges. Physical and mental health is so important these days. And a lot of times we don't think about that. But comedy and humor, I think we all like to laugh. Even in the worst of times, we try to find things to laugh about, right?
Yep.
How do you see, because there's a lot going on with technological change. People are worried about their jobs, AI taking over the world. How do you see humor sort of helping to accelerate success in
Yep.
conversations and in these environments?
For sure. With your permission, Terry, I might quickly share a couple of visuals on this very topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Hey, we're the payroll baddies, and our mission is to make payroll fun and relatable.
And call out industry when we hear it.
You gotta call it out. You gotta call it like you see it. But we also gotta shine a light on all those unsung payroll heroes out there, making sure we get paid.
Yeah, those are the real payroll baddies out there, and we love sharing their stories and showing them love.
With gold chain and everything, baby.
By the way, SAP is the best payroll out there, and if you don't like it,
Get out.
the sort of the rationale behind deploying humor has some science behind it. So this is don't let the cute birds fool you, as I say. This is some hard science from the Mayo
They're not the
Clinic.
Angry Birds.
No,
This
no,
is
these are
not the
hard. Look
Angry
at them.
Bird.
Yeah, good call. I like your humor as well. And these are proven, physiological, psychological benefits of humor. And so this is not a fiction or anything, and my experience is that it's kind of our job as HR professionals to knowing this, to where you can and it makes sense to do so without being intrusive, add some humor through the workforce and encourage it. So, the hard science is there. And then, of course, this is my Bloomberg experience here. They didn't allow me to do external cartoons, but this was in an internal magazine. I did the radio stuff externally. But, when maybe subject matter is daunting, like for some people, personal finance is scary. And so the idea of kind of demystifying it in a fun way with Celia Banner here, my other persona at Bloomberg, poking fun at fear of stocks and bonds, it's just a little bit taking the edge off, can be a valuable thing. And then this applies to, relationships as well. So when you're breaking the ice with people in any setting. So you think about dating sites or just parties or whatever, and when you're trying to connect with people, humor is always top of the list, like what people want in that other party that they're trying to relate to, be it a friend, a romantic relationship, why not a colleague? So in the interest of accelerating connection, which an HRBP needs to do rather quickly to get trust, to get under the hood, and have the manager you're serving kind of open up to you about what their hopes and dreams might be for the department, that connection acceleration through humor has been a go-to move for me, throughout my career. There's some risks. I've got a couple of other visuals later about what not to do with humor, because there can be a delicate balance. But a little light humor that you're still 95% serious, but peppering in this little garnish of levity is pretty effective. And HR, we talk to a lot of people, maybe more than any other department in an organization. So you need some hacks to make those connections, each conversation accelerate that trust building, and humor is a good way to do it.
Yeah. I do wonder if everybody has the ability to be humorous. I think they do. And then obviously the setting, right? But I remember the first time that I tried to incorporate something funny into a speech that I was doing. It failed miserably. Let's just put it that way. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking, but it was not good. I try to have humor in my conversations, especially on the podcast. It's fun to do that. But, some people might be afraid that they're not funny, or
Yeah,
maybe that they need to be careful about, what they're joking about, right? They don't want to create an environment where people are uncomfortable about
yeah,
their jokes. So I don't know, what advice do you give people in that regard?
yeah. Well, on the first point about not considering themselves funny. I've been lucky enough to do a fair amount of stand-up comedy at New York City clubs and a couple of gigs beyond that. And on occasion, you'll get a small, cold crowd. Sometimes it's includes, a bunch of other stand-ups who are in the back, and you're doing your stuff and you think you're delivering it appropriately and all the rest, and all you get are these kind of stony faces, maybe some smiles, but very few actual belly laughs or chuckles, which can be tough, maybe kind of like your first experiment in that presentation where you think it fell flat. And then afterwards, when I kind of do the rounds of the audience, maybe go back to the other comics in the back, and they're like, Peter, great set. I love the bit about such and such, a bit about such and such. And or one of the audience members comes up to me who, seem very stony faced during the show, and they're like, "Oh, where are you performing again?" It can be quite surreal. Don't always confuse a lack of real time, immediate approval with the humor not working. So that's thing one. Of course,
That's
the
good
humor
to
can also
know.
not work, but I've had so many experiences where the humor actually did work, and people were quietly enjoying it, and yeah, they're just kind of quiet about it.
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting.
yeah, so don't be discouraged. I'll go back to my visuals for some rules of thumb on maybe things to be careful of.
Yeah,
Um, so less is more. So, don't kind of have a gag in every paragraph or, every slide in that new orientation deck, because, then it'll be like, are you trying to educate me, or are you just, in here trying to get laughs? So consider sort of the prime directive of what you're trying to do, and consider, humor as just a little bit of a garnish. So that's takes some of the heat off. You don't have to be, this laugh a minute Gaffigan or Seinfeld, just, adding a garnish to otherwise serious content. And then, just be careful about who you belittle. And of course, the easiest way to do that is belittle nobody, with the
yeah,
possible exception of yourself. You don't want to kind of diminish your credibility by, appearing foolish or, over disclosing. But, everyone learns and goes through, new experiences. So maybe you're working with a first-time manager, and you can open up about some of the mistakes you made when you were a first-time manager. And some of them might be kind of funny, but it's in the past. You're not losing credibility now. Now you know better. Now you're in a role where you've been trusted with advising other first-time managers because you've learned, sometimes the hard way. So, you can make the fun of your past self without diminishing your current credibility. And then, belittling your organization is probably not the way to go either, with, the pay your paycheck, etc. However, every organization does face some impossible situations, trade-offs, and, speaking about those as the true challenges that they are, I think is definitely fair game. And then there are times, the layoff scenario, not time to break out the stand-up comedy routine. There are some situations where it's so serious, obviously, that you're not going to try and lighten the mood. But, it's not so very difficult to navigate through, what's going to be potentially offensive and what is safe. I would say that in the era of AI and those threats and or that to people's jobs and insecurity that you're referring to, then human connection, can be all the more powerful. I think one way to not get replaced in a hurry is to be sort of indispensable. And typically those who are indispensable are those who formed, strong connections with their stakeholders. And one of those accelerators to said strong connections can be humor. And if with your permission, I'll look at a couple of more slides to make that maybe more.
sure.
Awesome. So this is a book some viewers may be familiar with. It's kind of a very seminal text from the 1990s in how to manage professional service organizations, but the same applies to an HRBP, client relationship, or any kind of professional connection. And the idea is to go from, being maybe a transactional one-trick pony, service provider, to a trusted resource who maybe has a better knowledge of the business and the different moving parts, all the way up to a trusted advisor where you get the whole picture and you can be a resource, who knows the CEO's hopes, dreams, weaknesses. They've opened up to you. And I was lucky enough to get a week worth of training on this in beautiful Basking Ridge, New Jersey, about 15 years ago, thanks to one of my ad agency employers. And I actually developed a relationship with the co-author, Charlie Green. And not too long ago, I bounced this idea off him that this core trust equation could have some humor accelerators kind of just under the surface built into it. So to go over the model real quickly, so according to Charlie Green and his colleagues, trustworthiness is a function of credibility, so knowing your subject matter, reliability, showing up when you're supposed to, delivering your deliverables on time, and then intimacy, where somebody feels safe that they can disclose maybe weaknesses, fears, whatever, without them being weaponized against the client or the person who's sharing. And then, so those are all kind of accretive on the top. The one thing that kind of reduce the chances of trust building is self-orientation. So this might be, I had a scenario myself where I changed jobs and one vendor rep was very eager to speak to me on my first day in the new job about signing up and using them at this new place. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of, my first day. I'm still kind of just to know the ropes here. And I don't want to, and he wanted a legal agreement signed that day to, work with us. I'm like, I've never even worked with the legal team before. I can't get this screened or demand it be screened on my first day. He said, oh, it's really important you get done today. Anyway, cut a long story short, I found out later that there was a big sales promotion that if they booked a lot of business on that day, November 30th, he was going to stand to gain quite a bit personally. He didn't care about maybe screwing up my relationship with the new general counsel or the legal team. He was all about himself. So that's not a good example of trustworthiness.
Yeah.
So I got to talking to Charlie about this model, and we kind of aligned. I'll speak for myself. He didn't disagree with me that the credibility one is one where humor can play a role, kind of as discussed earlier, where you've got that mastery of the topic, so much so that you do a little bit of edutainment and make it engaging and still be highly accurate. And that can, definitely help. Reliability, showing up on time, maybe not as much of a potential for trust acceleration there. Intimacy, yes, kind of like that example of sharing your own past failures to make the person comfortable discussing their weaknesses and potential solutions
Yeah.
with you. So yeah, so I think in the era of AI and any other threats, there's so many threats these days, just getting closer more quickly and accelerating trust with your stakeholders through doing all these great things. You could just use the trust equation in and of itself. It's a really cool tool to think about. But if you do want for extra humor credit with the HR's humorist, think about maybe adding in that layer as well for a couple of, clicks even faster trust building.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're listening to this podcast versus watching it, check out the YouTube version of it so you can actually see the trust equation. I know Peter read it out there pretty well, but if you want to see it in real time, go check out the YouTube. One of the things I think it's interesting that you said you kind of got started on this comedic or humorous trail from watching The Simpsons. There's a lot that can be said for a lot of cartoonish, anime, whatever you want to call. My husband watches a lot of that and he thinks he's hilarious. So they do a lot of funny things and they attach them to, parts of organizations and people and employee life. It can be very comical. You use a lot of voices in your humor to get your point across sometimes. How did that get started? And what's your favorite voice?
Well, yeah. So I hope your husband wasn't listening to this, or because that kind of thinks he's hilarious. It could be.
He is actually pretty funny.
Okay, good. I got to.
Yeah, he's very funny.
There you go. See, false alarm. So yeah, I probably began. I kind of got this good ear for which does not translate to singing, by the way. So don't ask me to sing, but it does translate to maybe adapting to the States more quickly. I don't sound super duper Irish, and that transition did not take 30 years I've been here. It was quite fast, and it wasn't because I was trying to cast off my past identity. It was a subconscious thing where I just wanted to be understood and not have to repeat myself and just communicate effectively. Um, so I kind of had this innate ear, and then I would, growing up in Europe, you're exposed to lots of different accents as well, from French, German, and all the rest. So I was always kind of able to identify them and enjoyed kind of trying to pinpoint where somebody might be from. And then in the stand-up world, it was a bit of a differentiator, to be able to do voices, because a lot of people are very funny, probably funnier than me, but maybe my secret weapon could be that it can be pretty funny, and then I can also do other voices. So yeah, it was pretty early on when I was doing stand-up, maybe even 20 years ago, I was doing lots of accent stuff. And then more recently, I had that Disrupt HR video where I was just really hard on the larynx, as it turns out, 18 different personas in 5 minutes, because the
Wow.
HR format is exactly 5 minutes. So there was the conceit was, because this has been a crazy few years, Terry, for the HR profession, just such a roller coaster ride ever since Q1
Yeah.
2020. Now we're in Q1 2025, and boy, have we been through the wars. So, and everyone thinks that they can do HR better than HR, your other stakeholders.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't read about them. I love my stakeholders, but some of them do oversimplify, they think HR is simpler than it really is. So the conceit on this video, called Imposter Syndrome, was that, I'd do my Schwarzenegger and, maybe even little King Charles, and each of them would be doing HR stuff. And of course, missing the mark most of the time. We had, Tommy Lee Jones doing the fugitive thing where we're going to do a hard target search of every outhouse, hen house, and doghouse. Your fugitive is any remote employee. So, it got a lot of views. People liked it, and most importantly, I was trying to provide a little bit of solace that these other stars, didn't have this hard thing called HR figured out easy either. So that was a lot of fun, and yeah, just adds another dimension to having a bit of fun with HR topics.
Yeah. So which one is your favorite? You don't have to do Chewbacca because that one seemed very stressful on the larynx, but
Yeah, yeah. Um,
what's your
I
favorite one to do, or do you have a favorite?
My favorite one. Yeah, well, the trouble with Chewbacca is he's kind of like Groot. He just says the same thing or
Yeah.
gargles. It's a mixture of a gargle and a yawn. That's the technique I use for Chewbacca.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think I do like Schwarzenegger a great deal. He maybe is someone who a lot of people can do. He's not the hardest impersonation to do.
Yeah.
So, my Emperor Palpatine or Yoda is also a pretty easy one to do, but I love doing Yoda. Emperor
Yeah.
Palpatine is not as many people can do a good Palpatine, so I do enjoy doing that one. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Arnold is very recognizable, right? Like that's one that's hard to miss. Although in the next, I don't know how long that's going to last, right? It's kind of like your Sean Connery, so people don't,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
younger generation doesn't know who that is at this
That's
point.
right. Yeah, because I'm, born in the early 70s, and yeah, I thought I had a very good Connery. I think I do have a pretty good Connery, but the trouble is that the audience is like, he sounds vaguely familiar, but please do more modern people.
Yeah,
And
I like the British accent, but
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the this mysterious British Scottish guy who was a major star when I was growing up, but now less so, and of course passed on. But yeah, I gotta keep him current,
yeah.
for good results.
Have you is AI, has that become kind of a big part of your shtick now, or?
Well, I do. Yes, it's most of my humor is incredibly clean, and I do sets in. I'm known as a clean comedian, so very PG-13 stuff. My AI is maybe not quite saucy or anything, but it might be just slightly above PG-13. But yes, it has found its way in and definitely gets airtime on stand-up stages, but maybe not so much in the HR settings.
Yeah. So is there anything is there one routine that you enjoy more than others, or gets better results when you're out there talking to people?
Yeah, so I think I hope I never fully lose my Irish identity or sound completely American, because I think there's a reason why Arnold hasn't lost his accent fully. It's part of his brand, you
Yeah,
know.
for
That's
sure.
why everyone could do him, because they've been hearing Arnie doing his thing for so many years. Um, I think the fact that I'm this Irish guy who's still 30 years in, figuring out some of the quirks of, life here versus back in Europe it tends to be pretty evergreen. And but I acknowledge that I've lost some of my Irishness in a bit where my wife now complains that her exotic husband has, lost his accent and she feels cheated, this generic kind of American sounding guy. And I'm like, well, maybe she's overestimating the exoticness of Ireland, terrible weather, fair amount of self-medication and depression. And the guy is not so much the tall, dark, and handsome model, but more so the sort of, pale, average height, basically Ed Sheeran lookalikes, not sound-alikes, lookalikes. I think that incorporates a little bit of self-deprecation, which as one of the tools we talked about as being safe. And yeah, so this the stuff. So I think there's definitely lessons from the stand-up stage that translate to the conference room, where a little bit of light, self-deprecation, seeing the world in a slightly different angle can be fodder for humor. And maybe you're seeing client group's business from a slightly different angle than they might, as the leader who's maybe very invested in the awesomeness. But if you can gently, reveal some potential room for improvement while, giving praise where due, a nice bit of appreciative inquiry from your HRBP slash humorist, and that can be a pretty effective delivery mechanism. But yeah, I think that the same, the go-to moves from the stand-up stage, several of them can apply directly to our HR jobs.
Yeah. So somebody who's, thinking, I really need to, inject more humor into the work that I'm doing, or I want to be able to make this more relatable. What advice would you give them, or,
Yeah.
or what are some ideas that you could give them to kind of get started?
Yeah. So if you're kind of like very down on your sense of humor, like you're not, I don't know what's going to land, then you can, outsource it a little bit. There's like cartoon stock, or you can do, searches for low or no cost cartoons, which could be peppered into your presentation, say. And there's such a amazing bank and depth of great cartoons out there, like New Yorker type stuff, or just little one frame cartoons, that it's easy enough to find something funny and insightful about any topic, be it, new orientation, sales, even compliance. Try and make that funny. It's actually possible if you have, so that can be a kind of a non-scary way to start. It's just like, adding in some funny
Yeah.
things other people put together that have the same kind of visual impact as PowerPoint slides.
Yeah. I like that idea. I sometimes use just a one slide comic strip
Yeah,
in decks just to kind of make the point. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is, think your past experiences, which may not have felt funny at the time, are far more funny now, and people can relate to them,
yeah,
right? Like, the process of open enrollment every year, right?
yeah,
There's so many horror stories, and those horror stories can become, you know, comedic to an extent.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
And if you
Tragedy
haven't,
plus time equals comedy.
yeah,
Another formula.
yeah, if you haven't been around HR long enough to have the shtick, listen to other people's stories, right? I think one of the things about being in HR is not just your own experiences, it's what you hear from the employees about what they were trying to do and how they were trying to get through it and what all went wrong,
For
right?
sure. Yeah,
And those
yeah.
become great, great stories.
You hear so many stories, and you can just apply change the names to protect the innocent or the guilty, as
Exactly.
the case may be. But yeah, the stories themselves are out there, in the public domain as soon as they've been shared with you. But yeah, one kind of naive Irishman experience I had, which was kind of humbling at the time, but is funny in retrospect. I was at a Fidelity conference in Boston, my first big conference in my mid-20s or whatever, super excited. And I, was mingling, and this one guy said he was with Company X. I won't mention what Company X was. And I asked, oh, what do they do? And then not only does his jaw drop, but like every jaw within, earshot dropped as well. It's basically like Walmart or Coca-Cola or whatever. It was like, suffice it to say, when Interbrand does their most valuable brands analysis every year, it's always in the top 10. But for some reason, I had not come across it. So I sounded like quite the rube from, the sticks, not only not just the American sticks, but the Irish sticks. So at the time, I was mortified. But now I'm like, that's funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Tried to
They
adjust
thought
it.
you just came to, is this your first day on planet Earth?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I do think I maybe everybody's not funny, but I think everybody has the ability to inject humor into the conversation. And some of it is just thinking about the things that you've experienced and why they're funny, right?
Yeah.
And why other people can relate to them because they've had similar experiences. I mean, I think that's what's so hilarious about The Simpsons or any of these other shows is that so many things you can relate to, even if they're not as wild, you can relate to the issue,
Yeah.
right? You've
Yeah.
been there.
They'll have,
Yeah,
amped it up for the TV audience, but there's a
yeah,
slightly smaller version of that issue, which you probably
yeah,
experienced yourself.
yeah,
And yeah, and that's more, sharing those stories is more connection and trust building and edutainment, like maybe after hearing that story, people will ask a different question about that mysterious brand versus what do they do? It's like, oh, where are you based out of? And then they might Google on the side, okay, what does this company do versus, getting burned the way I was. But yeah, there's sharing the stories. It can be fun to share, it can be fun to hear, but there's also the learning and the edutainment and the connection building. I think it's a pretty virtuous cycle.
yeah. So if you're looking for ways to do this, one, check out the trust equation, check out Peter, and I'll get his website in a minute. But also just think about some of your own stories and look at follow some cartoons or like you said, some things that you can read about in any cartoon strip.
Yeah,
There's
those
lots of
those
good ones out there from a business perspective that you can subscribe to and check out. So,
funny. It's
um,
funny because it's true. Yeah, there's so many good, Dilberts and The Office, the TV show is so good
yeah,
and talks about real things in their own sort of extreme, nutty Michael Scott way. And there's, some just great comedians as well. Like just like liking a comedian can be a way of connecting through humor, even if it's just appreciating somebody else's work, like the craft of Seinfeld episodes, the way everything kind of comes together.
yeah,
How funny
yeah,
Jim Gaffigan is all the time. And occasionally people liken me to Jim Gaffigan, not for my humor, but for my appearance. Hopefully I'll get there on the humor front one day. But yeah, there's a lot to like out there and, to maybe bring a bit of levity into trying times.
yeah, yeah. Create your own brand. I mean, you don't have to be Jerry Seinfeld, like, right?
Yep.
You don't have to. Everything doesn't have to be a belly laugh, but create your own brand around it. Well, thank you, Peter. Thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure. This is great.
Where can people find more information about you and where you'll be and where they can learn a little bit more on this topic?
Oh, well, thank you so much. So my website is ValuesCulture. ValuesCulture.com, which is mostly serious because I love to do those culture strategy projects. And I've placed like 125 plus HR leaders, talent, all things people. So the executive search practice is a lot of fun. They can read about both of those things there. Find me on LinkedIn as well. I would love to connect with folks. Peter Phelan, there's several of us. I'm the one who calls himself the culture doctor. And in terms of performing, I'm going to be at Transform in Vegas on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th through the 19th. That's a 3-day conference. Should be a lot of fun. Hopefully there'll be like 4,000 people pros there. And I'm slated to do some HR comedy. And yeah, I'm also sometimes in the New York City stand-up clubs, but that can be a little bit less schedule predictable. But I look forward to talking humor with some of the folks who maybe listen to this and want to go deeper.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank our producers, Brand Method Media Group and Kelly, our marketing team, Cindy and Summer, who worked so hard to get this out to you. And thank you for tuning in. Also, don't forget to join Stacy and Cliff next week while they spill the tea on HR tech. That's always a great show. That's all the time we have for this episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed the episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review if you have a minute. Drop us a line. Let us know what you want to hear about. We love to know what you want to hear about so we can get the right topics on this show. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.